Hello and welcome to the first episode of Gardening Australia for 2017. We've missed you, but we're back with barrow loads of ideas, inspiration and practical advice for you to dig into over the year ahead. To kick things off, I've come up to the beautiful, cool Blue Mountains to visit a gardener whose garden is a work in progress. More from here soon, but let's see what else is on our first show for the year.
I'm taking you behind the scenes at the Royal Tasmanian Botanical Gardens to meet a couple of the unsung horticultural heroes that keep the patch in tip-top shape.
What exactly is a flower? Well, wait until I give you the lowdown. Sure, some are full of nectar and sweetness, but others, well, they're cheaters, fraudsters and downright stinkers.
My garden is full of flower colour, yet one of the most important groups of colour are the foliage colours, especially those in shades of silver and grey. They contrast and they complement all the flower colours, but they're also really tough in standing up to the heat.
I love doing vegetable growing stories, especially here at the patch, the Royal Tasmanian Botanical Gardens. Now, as much as I'd like to take credit for the patch looking this good, it's actually down to the dedicated staff that work tirelessly behind the scenes. And I reckon it's time for you to meet some of them. Well, Adam, the patch is certainly looking great. What's your secret, mate?
Oh, just little and often, Tino.
Yeah.
Just spend time here, just sort of, you know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, plug away. What's not to love? It's just such a great environment to be in.
Adam Lancaster is the horticulturalist in charge of the patch.
Probably the three major tasks would be obviously weeding, planting and planning. There's an awful lot of planning goes into, you know, what we plant, when we plant it. We also have, you know, volunteers that need to be coordinated.
So what do you do for Gardening Australia?
Well, we coordinate with you guys just so that things are on hand when you need them. We sort of liaise behind the scenes a bit so that we know what you guys want to film and when, and we'll provide you with the space. We also grow the seedlings in-house here for you to plant and provide tools and other inputs that you need for the show.
Yeah, well, the spuds are looking all right.
Yeah, they're coming along really well this year. We should get a decent harvest out of those.
Might be good to actually do a story on root crops like carrots and beetroot afterwards,
okay.
perhaps.
Yeah, a bit of rust on the garlic, but you know, we'll still harvest it.
Well, we did want to do a story on green manure. Might be a good spot.
Yeah, okay. Well, how about after harvest, we leave it fallow for a month or so.
Yeah.
And then I'll drop some compost in there and leave it to you guys.
That sounds great. Hopefully it cooks off a little bit of the fungus. There's a lot of food in this garden. You must just go around eating all day.
I do. It's one of my favourite things to do. And yeah, there's just so much stuff around to eat. I very rarely need to bring lunch.
The patch is used not just by Gardening Australia, but by a range of community groups, like Second Bite, which harvest food for people in need.
We'll have a variance of a range of tasks ready for them to do. It could be planting, could be weeding, generally harvesting as well, depending on the time of year, of course, and what's available. Nice. And in return, the harvested produce goes back to Second Bite's warehouse where it gets distributed to people who need it.
All of the seedlings planted in the patch, including the ones used for the show, are grown in the garden's nursery by horticulturalist Margot White and her team of volunteers. So what do you truly love about growing things?
Definitely I like growing from seed. I'm not a cutting girl. I like if you put in a small seed and you get a big plant, it's just fabulous.
Yes. And we've grown quite a few this year, so that should be a good one.
The growing group volunteers are really critical to what I do. I have about 25 to 30 people that come 2 times a week, or, you know, split shifts, and we work pretty intense for the 2 hours that they come. There's an ox heart that needs a label just there, this one near my thumb. I don't know why they keep coming, but they seem to enjoy the company, and also they enjoy it. In fact, growing for Gardening Australia is one of their key things that they really like these days.
Well, we really appreciate it, that's for sure. So what kind of plants are you growing for us at Gardening Australia?
We grow a lot of onions and shallots and leeks. We grow a lot of herbs and a lot of leafy greens. And of course there's the tomatoes at this time of the year, so there's plenty of them to choose from, Tina.
If you're in Hobart, pop into the patch. It's open every day of the year. And say g'day and thank you to Adam and Margot, who worked tirelessly to make the patch a special and productive place, as well as a Gardening Australia favourite. Margot has some great tips about propagating from seed, and we'll be back later in the program to show you how you can do it at home.
If you think your tomato has got a virus infection, then it's important to get rid of it immediately. The reason is pests like aphids can spread the virus from diseased plants to healthy ones. Now, you don't need to worry about composting the waste because when the plant breaks down, the virus dies with it. The important thing to do is to act promptly immediately you see any concern.
Blossom end rot. What is it and what do you do about it? Blossom end rot occurs in plants like tomatoes or capsicums, and it's where you see this black sunken area at the bottom of the fruit. There are two main causes. In most areas of Australia, it's actually caused by a lack of calcium, and to overcome that, all you simply need to do is supplement with dolomite or agricultural lime. The other main cause is irregular watering. When plants dry out a bit, then they get a really good soak, then they dry out again. In my case, it was caused by natural irregular watering. We had 2 summer downpours, which was quite unusual for this area. And not all the fruit was affected, only fruit that was on the plants at the time. Most of the fruit since then is all good, so there's nothing I need to do or worry about.
You know, it is interesting reading back over the Garden Journal from the first couple of years. Growing up as a Sydney gardener, temperate and subtropical plants were just, you know, run in our veins. You get up here in the subtemperate and a bit of elevation, basalt soils, like a whole new religion.
Mount Irvine, a tiny village high up in the Blue Mountains with its cool climate, is a world away for Michael Bates, who spends most of his time building and designing gardens for clients in Sydney. Look at you in your element here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Finally made it.
It's good to be here. So how long have you been involved with this garden?
Well, I bought the place in 2001, so 15 years we've been at it.
Set around a 100-year-old cottage, the 1-hectare rambling garden is a mix of distinctive trees and mass underplantings.
So we raised the canopy of the lily-pilly to get a bit more sun in here in this garden bed to get some deep shrubbery, separate the courtyard from the drive.
I can see there with the acubas, they're really golden yellow in the sun.
Yeah. The idea is that we've got this rampant lamium, this ground cover that just takes over, and then the buxus pop in that. We've got the aspidistra curving around here as a counterpoint to the stone wall, and then the nandina on the other side is an S-shaped hedge. So we're just making little garden rooms.
And what about the tree fern?
Well, the tree fern was always here, and for me, it just says Blue Mountains.
I wasn't expecting to see a cluster of palms like this tucked around the back.
Nah, you don't expect to see palms in the Blue Mountains. But these Chinese windmill palms, they can take this climate. And, you know, they're beautiful.
So they'll do all right, eh?
Yeah, they flourish up here.
Michael's eye for landscaping details is evident everywhere you look, from paving, retaining walls, exposed stone steps, and eye-catching sculptures.
So the whole concept of terraforming or landforming is that you change elevation. So in a few metres, we go up 3 or 4 metres in the air. It's just like climbing up on the roof or up a tree and getting a different perspective on your garden. Sculpting this in plasticine was just one of the greatest pleasures. Originally, the idea came from after a tour of Scotland, garden tour of Scotland. I went to see the Charles Jenks Gardens, and I just Had to have one. And you know what? Kids slide down it.
Oh,
You can run down
yeah, I was
it.
hoping you'd say that. And run around the edge,
Yeah.
walk around.
It's just lean back, do a bit of cloud watching.
It's good, it really cradles you. Oh, yeah.
Look at the sky, watch the clouds.
So what sort of grass did you use?
Well, we went for zoysia because it's a slow-growing grass, and we've got to mow it with a fly mower and a whippersnapper, so tried to keep the maintenance down.
Yeah, but it's holding the shape really well.
Well, beautiful basalt soil. So, I've got a new sculpture, and I want you to help me with it.
Oh, yeah? What do we have to do?
Well, it's a flock of birds, and it starts from down here. The concept is we start the flock here, as tall as it can be, and then we arch down here randomly, birds flying around, and we tail off down there. So, gloves on.
Sounds interesting. God, I love his enthusiasm.
This is the first bird.
Okay, there's number 2.
Yeah, we need to tune this one. Now he's flying straight.
Yeah, I reckon.
So, this is the last 2. Do you think I've gone too far?
You go too far? Never.
You know the great thing about this? There's no wrong or right. We could wander out here tomorrow and do the same thing a different way, and it'd still be just as good.
It's just brilliant.
I think the sustainability part of this garden, or what makes it really work, and everyone here who gardens feels the same, is that you spend half of your time making it and crafting it and working it, and the other half sharing it and spending time with people you care about. Cup of tea! Up here on the mountain, we're all gardeners. It's still warm.
Yeah, it's just out of the others.
Now, do we want forks for this, or...?
No.
Hello, Cost. I can smell cake.
They bring cuttings, they bring flowers, they, bake cakes.
Freshly picked roses, Mr. Lincoln roses.
Oh, imagine having time to smell the roses. It's just good old-fashioned country living, and that's what makes this place really magic.
My garden is full of flower colour, yet one of the most important groups of colour are the foliage colours, especially those in shades of silver and grey. They contrast and they complement all the flower colours, but they're also really tough in standing up to the heat. The pale coloured foliage of plants like this cotyledon means that the leaves reflect light, and that means that the leaves don't get as hot. The same with this beautiful Buddleia crispa. The end result is the plant doesn't need as much water to survive. Many are also adapted to tolerate really poor soils, like this old man saltbush or Atriplex nummularia. It's used to remediate salt-infested plains and grows really well in the desert. Now, if you haven't got space for a tall shrub like this one, but you want that hardiness, there's also ground cover or creeping forms of saltbush. This one's Rhagodia spinescens. That feels lovely and soft and furry. You'll also find that many silver or grey foliage plants are also covered with a fine layer of hairs. The hairs act as a windbreak or insulation, trapping a layer of moisture down against the leaf, another adaptation so the plant doesn't lose as much moisture through the leaf. This dwarf Bolotta is a great example. Not only do I love them for their hardiness, but I love the way that silver or grey foliage plants help to tie a garden together when it comes to flower colour. So, whether it's the complementing the yellow flowers on this phlomis, or the silver against the purple flowers of this iochroma, pink flowers, red flowers, white flowers, whatever colour flower you care to imagine, silver foliage will help tie it together. Silver and grey foliage plants really do make a great addition to any garden.
Got a glut of tomatoes? We've got the answer.
in the show, Margot White, a horticulturist at the Royal Tasmanian Botanical Gardens, showed me around the glasshouses that she supervises. And while I was there, she also had some great tips about propagating from seed.
Well, I think that it's really important to have good soil mix to actually put in trays. Now, a lot of people sow into punnets, which are like this.
Yep.
And they sow directly into punnets like that. We don't do that anymore. We do it into cell trays like this, and it means that the plant doesn't suffer from being pricked out, and also the plant, when you're actually repotting it on, it's of a good size.
Yep.
To do that, we direct planting with tweezers, which my volunteers do much better than I do because they have much more practice. And it's sort of one seed, one cell, and that just sort of spaces it.
So your mix seems to be mainly composted bark and sand?
That's right. So we buy in the composted bark and sand, and then we add our own fertilisers and wetting agents. Don't go too low. And it's just below the surface. If you were doing it into a punnet, you could just sort of do a bit of a light sieve over. Some people put vermiculite over, we don't bother. Once it's watered in, it sort of settles anyway. The one thing, the more critical than anything, is making sure that you put your label in and the date. I put that in the back of the tray like that.
Now, are you soft watering this?
Yeah, and it's really important. That's another thing. You cannot skimp on hose fittings, I don't think. And our hose fittings are very, very much like rain, so that you can't get that blast. So a nice broad spray, gentle, nice and gentle. So the other thing is that we like to use disposable gloves. It just adds to hygiene, and that is one thing that's really critical within a nursery situation, and I can't say it enough, it's hygiene, hygiene, hygiene. You've really got to be very, very aware that you don't want to cross-contaminate, or you don't want other things happening.
Right, you've got your seeds in, your plants are growing, you've kept them well watered. What signs tell you they're ready to come out of their cells?
Well, from here you could actually look and see roots underneath, but these ones were the size today. These were in the cell trays today.
They've just been potted?
They've just been potted only a couple of hours ago, and that's the size that they would have been in the cell tray.
Wow.
So that's, it's sort of nice. The cell tray allows for a little bit of space too. When you have them really close in a punnet, they get too lanky.
Yeah, I know that well.
Yeah.
So there you go, some great tips from an expert that you can try at home.
Flowers are wonderful things. They mean so much to us. We use them as gifts to celebrate love, to mark our grief, and for the joy they bring into our lives. But what is a flower? Simply put, a flower is a special structure which flowering plants use to reproduce. But that still leaves the question unanswered. What exactly is a flowering plant? Now, I can take you back to a time before flowers were invented. Angiosperms are the flowering plants, and their predecessors were the gymnosperms, things like conifers. And this pine is a classic example. It has both male structures and female structures on them, but they're completely unadorned. These plants are pollinated by the wind, and that means they have to produce large amounts of pollen to get from one structure to another. It's rather hit and miss. Grasses are flowering plants, and like the old gymnosperms, grasses are wind-pollinated. This Queensland blue couch is flowering its heart out, but the majority of flowering plants use members of the animal kingdom for pollination. Everything from insects to birds to mammals, and that technique is really precise. The development of flowers using animals as pollinators proved explosively successful, and flowering plants replaced the non-flowering plants to be the dominant form of vegetation on Earth. Of course, the question in every pollinator's mind is, what's in it for me? And usually the answer is in the form of protein-rich pollen, or this. Look at that, sugar-rich nectar. This is Thunbergia mycerensis. In its native India, it's pollinated by sunbirds. Orange and red flowers are designed to attract birds. And the way the bird of paradise flower attracts them is, firstly, it provides a perch. This is where the bird sits. The nectar, the bait, that's just held inside here. Now, as the bird pushes its beak in, this structure opens up, pollen coats the neck of the bird, and it takes it away to the next flower, and that way, pollination happens. But some plants don't deliver what they promise. Native rock orchids put out lots of alluring perfume, but don't have any nectar. However, by the time the insect works that out, the pollinating work is done. And from raw deal to rotten deal, some plants smell like decomposing meat and attract things like blowflies. For example, the world's largest flowering plant, the Titanarum. And then there are flowers that promise sex by putting out the scent, that is, the pheromones of females ready to mate, like some Australian native orchids. In trying to find the female at the source of the scent, the pollination is done. And sometimes part of a flower even looks like the female insect. When the male attempts to mate, he does the pollination work, as with the common wasp orchid. One final thought. What really is a flower? Some gardeners like foliage, others it's about flowers. But flowers, really, well, they're made from petals. And what are petals? They're nothing more than modified leaves. So in a way, we're all followers of foliage. Now, flowering plants owe their reproductive success to using animals as pollinators. Now, gardeners, we plant, we sow, we pollinate, we cultivate. Possibly gardeners are also captives of the flower world. Well, at least that's how I like to think of it.
As gardeners, understanding the weather is critical. Now, you may have noticed, around my garden, I've got all sorts of strange-looking devices. For example, in the veggie garden behind me, there's a white object which is a temperature and humidity sensor. In fact, I've got several of these dotted through different parts of the garden, including one over there and one in the driveway. And these are all used to determine the specific microclimate conditions of these different parts of the garden. I've also got a weather station sitting up above the pergola that gives me rainfall, wind speed and wind direction. Now, this may seem a little bit over the top, but they're all used for research purposes, and all of the data is logged at 10-minute intervals, and I can access that from my computer or my smartphone. Now, you don't have to have all this fancy gear to have a better idea of the microclimate conditions of your garden. I'll show you two things that I think are absolutely fundamental. The first thing is a rain gauge. You'd be amazed at how much rainfall can vary across the suburbs. Now, strictly speaking, a rain gauge like this should be located twice the distance of the height of any surrounding structure to make sure that it's not obstructed, and also right at ground level. But really, to be practical in a garden, the main thing is to make sure that it's clear of anything that's going to prevent rain from getting in, and also I like to set it at eye level, so it's nice and easy to see, and that's good enough for me. The other thing is a temperature gauge, or outdoor thermometer like this one. Now, importantly, it's good to have one that will record both the maximum and minimum temperature. Now, knowing how hot it gets on a particular day is interesting in itself, but if you're a gardener who wants to be growing temperate fruit trees or other plants that need a certain amount of chill hours to flower and fruit, then knowing that info is very, very handy. Now, where you locate it is also critical. because they don't like to be in direct sun. That will corrupt the results. So on the south side of a building, like here, under the eave and also shaded by a screen like this or a wall is very, very good. Also having it by the back door is very practical because it will need checking and resetting every day if it's a manual device like this one. So there you go. 2 simple, inexpensive devices that can really help you to get to know your garden better. And that means growing better. Enjoy.
Well, that's it for our first show back. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to check out our website, and we'd really love for all of you to join us this year on Facebook and Instagram so we can continue chatting about gardening all week. Go on, get online and get amongst it. Let's have a look at what's on next week's show.
I travelled to the Sunshine Coast to discover how an expat Kiwi garden designer has created an adventure in flowers and foliage set amongst the backdrop of native forest. It's very Australian and extremely beautiful.
I'm visiting a fabulous inner city garden and kitchen where some tremendous work is being done in helping feed Melbourne's needy.
And I'm building some amazing new self-watering veggie beds that'll only need to be topped up once a week, even in the hottest weather.